Hello, welcome to our May 3rd, 2022 Club Cubase live stream. I'm going to do a quick audio test and we will go ahead and get started. Bear with me just a second. Hello, welcome to our May. All right, audio sounds okay on my monitor and computer. My name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America as a product specialist on primarily focusing on Steinberg products. I'm based outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. I'll be the host for the live stream today. If you're attending the live stream and watching it live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. How the live stream works is you could just simply ask questions in the live chat field, or you could email questions directly to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So if it's something that's a little more involved, it's always appreciated. And we will try to get through all the questions as completely and as succinctly as possible. And we should have, so when asking questions, a couple things to consider. If you could indicate which version of Cubase you're using, so whether it's, Elements, Artist, Pro, LEAI, if it's version 12, 11, 10, 10.5, etc., in which operating system, that information is sometimes helpful. And when asking questions, realize that my ability to answer the questions in real time may get thwarted as we get more questions, but I'll try my best to catch up. Today, we usually go for about 4 hours, but I'm going to have to end at about 3 hours and 10 minutes as my wife's on a business trip in Denver. And I need to get my son from school. But we should have our normal 4-hour live stream on Friday. So just a quick heads up with that. So we should have later tonight all of the topics covered in the particular in the live stream. Pinned to the top of the comments field with timestamps, so you can immediately jump to particular topics as you read the descriptions. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to Club Cubase, or you could go to, cubaseindex.com. Jan from Stockholm has been kind enough to compile all the data and put it into a searchable website. We want to give special thanks to our two moderators. They're not Steinberg employees or Yamaha employees. They're just kind of volunteers who make it a better community. So we want to give special thanks to Agent K and to Jazz Dude for that. Also, another wonderful resource of information that's available is the Cubase Nation Discord, and Jazz Dude does a lot to compile useful and relevant tutorials for people there. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pop out the chat so I don't have to scroll as much on my end. All right, so we have a question or a feature request from Alex Morgan. So it says, feature request, please, when copying a compressor with sidechain, can the plugin also copy the input source? At the minute, it resets it to no input. All right, so let's say if we have a compressor here, and this compressor has a sidechain input, that when we copy it to another track, this particular compressor doesn't have the sidechain source. So I understand where it's something to be aware of, but I think that there's probably more cases than not of not wanting to have compressor settings automatically carry over. Like every plugin that you copy have the option of doing the plugin input source, but if you're copying just the plugin and its settings, but regardless, I'll pass it along as kind of a feature request. Maybe it's with a modifier key or a little pop-up comes up, if there is another, if there's a sidechain input asking if you want that for confirmation. But I think I understand, and I think it does make sense for a lot of use cases where you could copy the compressor over to a different channel, but maybe you don't want the same sidechain sources. But regardless, I'll pass it along as a feature request. All right, so we have Mike Rivera, and he has a question. When recording in Cubase Pro, it jumps back a bar before the recording starts. How can I disable that function? All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. And I think this is with MIDI because Mike had sent in a question as well. So let's say we're at measure 10 here. So, there's two different ways to kind of have that could cause it to roll back. So let's say one is going to be just we could have, if we're doing kind of a count in versus pre-roll. So if I have count in, let's say if I have my metronome activated here and I hit record, I have 2 measure count in, and let me just come over here and arm the track. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so let's say we're going to start at measure 10. I hit record. All right, so that started right at measure 10. If we have this, so we could have our count in activated. So if I don't have my count in activated and I hit record, so let's say I just wanted to, so if we do this, so let's say while I'm playing, and then activate record, it will then kind of base it on, not where I hit record, but it will kind of sense where MIDI data was going in. There is a preference that could also affect this behavior. If you go to MIDI and to record, and then you could say snap MIDI parts to bars. So if we actually go and record, let's say earlier, and if we're sending information beforehand, so let's say I wanted to record and I have a 2 measure count in, but I hit the pedal or I'm just noodling, that once we have a 2 bar count in, if I send MIDI data before it goes into record, it will add that count in data because there is MIDI data in the buffer, like in case you played slightly ahead of the beat. Now, another way that people run into this is also if we activate pre-roll. So sometimes people will use pre-roll as a count in, and if we don't see pre-roll, we could activate pre-roll and post-roll from the transport. So let's say now if I wanted to activate a 1 measure pre-roll, that as soon as I hit record, it's going to go back. And then we could have that particular, so that would actually send the pre-roll, and if we capture MIDI data, at that point, that could be causing it. So check to make sure Mike, if you could let us know if you're using pre-roll or if you're just using the count in to work with, that could be helpful information. But if you're using the count in and you send any MIDI data, whether it's a sustain pedal, that may automatically put it within the length of the count in time. So if you could let us know, Mike, that'd be helpful. And thanks for your question. All right, we see Benny from Sweden. We see Jan from Stockholm of cubaseindex.com fame. Okay, so we have a question from Dallas LaRue. For a while, I was saving songs by name only. I ended up with a lot of numbered file folders with nothing on them. Would it hurt to delete these files? So probably not, as long as you have kind of, some people may do that to have incremental saves, like, oh, I wanted to just jump back to, 4 saves ago. But if that's not something that you want to do, then you could just choose to delete those. All right, so we see Alexander Plasko from Connecticut, Stefan from Sweden, John Costigan from a rainy Wisconsin. All right, then we have Soren from Sweden as well. Uno Memento from Finland. We have KG Holly from Ottawa. And Mike Rivera is from San Antonio. All right, we have Rob checking in from Tarpon Springs. And Jazz Dude's on as well. We have Juha from Finland. All right, we have Frank checking in from Kingston, Canada. We have Sir Robert from Atlanta. Evans Recording Studio from India. All right, we have Utpal Kandel from Australia. It's my favorite country. I visited. All right, and we have Abhi checking in from India as well. Jeff Price from Australia. So we have 2 different Australians. It's 3 a.m. All right, and we have Balsa from Montenegro. All right. Okay, so we have a question from Rob. Is there a need to bounce or render an audio file that has been edited to use the warp marker option on it? Does make new version choice make a difference after you edit it to have an effect? So if you, as you're rendering files, let's say if we jump to this project, and let's say if we've done like warp editing. So let's say if we're here and I've just chosen to do like free warp editing on this. Okay, so let's say I've come and I now have done various warp edits directly here on my project window. So all of this information, when you play back the audio, all of this information with the warping will automatically play back in kind of real-time processing. So it'll take the audio file and then process it with all of these changes. So you can choose to flatten the processing, or you could come over to your audio and choose to bounce selection and just say replace. And now I have kind of an actual audio file that's been rendered with all of the settings. We don't necessarily need to do that unless, like sometimes if I was doing editing for someone and I wanted to pass on my file and maybe they're running a different program or they just need a WAV file to drop in, and I had a bunch of warp editing, I might choose to render in place or do a bounce selection to give them in case they don't have the same software version or the same software where they could just drop it in. If you're just playing the file back in Cubase, there's no need to do that unless you're having, like, you're near the edge of CPU usage, because this will take a little bit of processing. So, if you wanted to render those particular files, you could do a bounce selection or render in place. When you mentioned to save new version, and when we see this, it's not necessarily for the audio file itself, but that's going to be for the project, and that will automatically increment. So like this project is called Jump Off. If I clicked on save new version, it'd be Jump Off 01. If I clicked on if I was working on that and did save new version, it would be jump off 02. So, but that doesn't necessarily deal with rendering the particular audio files, but how the project and the edits can affect the audio files, if that makes sense. All right, John Costigan wants people to hit the like button. That allows us to continue to do these. We see Trond from Norway. Thanks for joining us. It's good to see you back. All right, we have Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. So probably virtual ice cream time. All right, so you have a question from Dallas LaRue. Was there an upgrade in Spectral Layers from Cubase 11 to 12? Cubase 11 says Spectral Layers 7. On 12, it says Spectral Layers 8. So when Spectral Layers, so you get Spectral Layers 1 with your license of Cubase. And with Spectral Layers 1, and that was at version 7 when Cubase 11 was released, and then last summer Spectral Layers 8 was released. So Spectral Layers 1 version 7 was updated to Spectral Layers 1 version 8. So and that was a free download for people that had a Cubase or Nuendo license. So that's why, so as Spectral Layers 8 was updated, the Spectral Layers 1 version was also updated. So within the Cubase 11 product life cycle, you could then just download the Spectral Layers 1 version 8. And since that's the current version, that's the one that comes with Cubase 12. So it's been available for Cubase and Nuendo users since last summer. So. Okay, so we have a question from Soren. So it says, Greg, if I apply plugin EQ and I want to level it where it was and not raise the volume of the track, are the level matching always by sight and level meter, or is there a better way? So most of the time, as we add EQ to a track, you're boosting or cutting particular frequencies. And realize that could make your overall track, louder or softer. So a lot of times, one of the things that you could do in most EQ plugins, like as we, gain, as we do gain or cut, is often within the particular, EQ plugin. Like here, we could adjust pre-gain just to adjust, or if we are using something like frequency. So say if we go to our frequency EQ, at this point, you will often see like just the output level of the EQ that you could adjust. So there isn't kind of an automatic way of doing that. And, sometimes that's why you're EQing a track is to kind of boost it. But, you could use meters to do that. But you may be, you may be working against the EQ that you just applied if you tried to adjust the volumes. Wavelab has a function where you could, because as we add plugins, there's a way, generally it could have a monitoring level increase. And sometimes that's why you add those plugins. But there is a function in Wavelab called the smart bypass, where you could, listen to the plugins with their processing, but at the same level. So that's usually more of a mastering scenario. So it's in Wavelab, but not in Cubase. So you would have to kind of do it manually inside of Cubase. Okay, so you see from Jay from Connecticut, I hope you're well. When setting up Nuendo, I noticed that Spectral Layers 1 installed as a separate software module without dongle. Are all Spectral Layers versions now dongle free? Other titles? So it's the license for Spectral Layers 1, as we mentioned just a couple questions ago, is part of Cubase or Nuendo. So the Spectral Layers 1 is always run off of the Cubase or Nuendo license. And since the latest versions of Cubase 12, Nuendo 12, that would mean that it's using the new Steinberg license management system. The Spectral Layers Elements and Spectral Layers Pro, that is still using the USB-E licenser, and when that is updated to the next generation, at that point it will probably be on the new Steinberg Activation Manager system, so where it won't require a dongle. But either Spectral Layers, Elements or Spectral Layers Pro can run off of a soft E license as well. So it's, so the Spectral Layers 1 is just accessing the, Cubase 12 or Nuendo 12 license. So. All right, so you see from Mike Rivera, he just says he uses Countin and just goes over his previous recording. So let's come here. All right, so let's say if I do just a quick recording. All right, so I hit that before, so I'm going to wait till my count in. All right, so let's say now that I want to record right here. So I'm going to use my count in again. So we see that recording started right where we started it there and didn't overlap. So so let me know if that's how you're working and if it's still going back for you, Mike. And one other thing to check is I don't think any of these would, your MIDI record modes shouldn't make a difference there. But see if you're sending like any MIDI information beforehand, even if it's a sustain pedal or something like that, because that could trigger it. All right, great to see Michael Pierce on the live stream. All right, my Chatfield just jumped, so I'm finding my spot. All right, great to see Cap Energy Music, as I mentioned. Okay, so I just found my spot. So you see question, when I use a compressor to sidechain a sent reverb on my vocals, another sidechain reverb appears in the send tracks of my vocals. What does this do? It also has a slider to go from 0. Okay, so let's say if I have a vocal track here, so we'll just call this box, and let's say if I add a send track here, so let's say I add a reverb. All right, and let's say on this send track, I wanted to do sidechain by just throwing kind of a compressor here. So I wanted this to sidechain, let's say from my vocal. Okay, so when we go to my vocals, we'll go to send. So we're going to have our reverb. So we could see, all right. Okay, so when I use a compressor sidechain on my reverb vocals, another sidechain reverb appears on sent tracks of my vocals. What does that do? Is it also a slider to go from 0? So make sure that when you look at it, like here, you know, we could see our sidechain. So it looks like we have 2 of the same sends going out to this. But if we want it to go directly, but when we look at kind of the name conventions, that we could see the sends, that I could have it go to Revelation or the effects Revelation, and that would be to the compressor, and that would be the sidechain input there. So maybe that's why you're seeing kind of 2 of the same names. So let me know if that makes sense and kind of what you're seeing. And it's from Balsa. All right. So we see from Jay from Connecticut, maybe recording a singer-songwriter, says question regarding punch in, punch out, comping lanes, other. Would you be so kind as to share differences and possibly which you prefer and why? So a lot of times, if I was just doing, so let's say, just switch this to bars and beats. So, you know, I may just come here, like if we were tracking, let's say this particular track, you know, if we're doing like kind of just linear recordings and we're just doing kind of punch ins and say, okay, we're just going to, so a lot of times I may record like just to take, you know, one thing I'd always say is, you know, always be recording. So record everything, you know, tell them that you're doing a sound check and record them, because they're probably going to give you a better performance when they're not nervous knowing that you're recording them. So let's say we get a recording and we want to actually just do a quick like punch in, like let's say, oh, you know, it's perfect except for one word. So I'll just take off the snap here, and there's a preference that you could set that when you come here, we could say under editing, that we could say cycle follows range selection. And this is really handy just for doing like quick vocal dubs, you know. So let's say, okay, you know, I need to punch in like this word right here. So if I have that preference activated, we can now just come here, and as I record, we could hit I and O, and we could turn these on our transport. So now as I play, we could just punch in and punch out. But let's say we want it to, you know, and maybe they're having a hard time with this one note, and we wanted to give them perhaps a little more time overall. So I could set kind of a longer range. So let's say I want to give them like a measure before and a measure after, a couple beats before, after. But I want it to punch in only to be on one particular word. So we could come to your transport, and then you have what we call punch points. So we could say, now I want to take just, you know, if I wanted to take just this particular event here, I could say, okay, this, I want to set my punch points from the current range selection. And then we could say, I want to give them like a little bit, I wanted to have my cycle be independent of that. So now we could have the loop play. Once we have punch in and punch out active, the punch points, it will now cycle. If I have cycle turned on, it would help. So I will come here, let's activate cycle. So as we play, it's going to now punch in, punch out, cycle back, punch in, punch out. So we could decouple the punch in and punch out from the cycle if you want to, using punch points. Now, if you wanted to, you know, do a comp, let's say you did multiple passes, at this point you could open the lanes, and use what looks like the little hand tool, and then you can say, I like this part from this recording, this part from this recording, and then you could find kind of the best spots to create a comp track, and then that would automatically be comped for you. So those are a couple things to try, Jay. All right. All right, so we have Rick France from Oregon, I believe. All right. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see, hi Greg, is there any tool in Cubase similar to Audio Suite to do direct processing on events? Can you demonstrate how to do this? So, yeah, it's really easy. So let's say I have like this particular, like I have a drum loop here. So we listen to our drum loop. So let's just come here. So let's say we listen to our drum loop. All right, so if I wanted to do processing, all you have to do is select it and then go to your audio menu, and you can see kind of all of your plugins. So at this point, you say, okay, I just wanted to run a flanger on this. So at that point, now when we play back, and then we can say at this point, okay, I wanted to also do an EQ. So we'll just say, okay, let's do like I wanted to do that EQ processing. I wanted to run it through a morphing filter. And let's reverse the audio. So at this point, then I can say, okay, I wanted to take the EQ out independently, and this is even after saving the particular file. So I can come here, and then we could just right-click and say, okay, well, let's take the graphic EQ out. And so at this point, we could just say, let's delete that. So I could just select the event. I could delete different events. So say, okay, now I wanted to get rid of the morphing filter, or I wanted the reverse. We could even change the order of different events. So we could just even delete all and go right back. So all you have to do is select the event and just go to audio and plugins or to processes, or you could just open up the direct offline processing just by hitting F7. And that way that will apply the plugins, and you could undo them in any order non-sequentially without any consequences. All right, so we just see from KG Holly, Greg, thanks so much for all your videos. Always a great wealth of info. So I'm glad they're helpful for people. All right, so we see when I add a question, when I add a quick controller, then I add MIDI effects like bright and harmonic to tweak the sound. After I finish my project, when I open it up again, the quick control that I add is despair. Okay, so I'm not sure. James, if you could indicate if you're doing quick controls on an instrument or an audio source, and if the instrument responds to bright or harmonic. So generally, like if we have an instrument sound, we could, let's say if we come here, and I don't understand the despair part, maybe it's a typo, but you could, if you're in version 12, you could click on the QC here, and generally it's the first 8 parameters will be set up for quick control functions. So if I come here, I have 8 faders and I could control these. But if I wanted a different parameter for quick controls, all you'd have to do is, click on learn and then move the parameter. And now we could just learn, that particular parameter, or you could look through all the functions within the plugin. And if we want to, record that information, so let's say as we're playing along here, all right, and I play a note. So, all right, so now when we've done this, sometimes people will look into the MIDI event, but if you're doing quick controls, generally most of the quick controls can show up as depending on the information here. So let's see if we look at it directly in our list editor. So, but often what you would need to do is just to click on automation, and then as we would adjust, that's just the quick control show up as automation data as opposed to MIDI data within the parts themselves. So if you could maybe clarify that a little bit, James, that would be helpful. All right, so we see Samson Strike from Austria joining us. Thanks for being a part of the community today. And we see Michael Teams is on fire with ice cream today. Maybe the warm weather is inspiring him in Texas. Okay, so we have Paco just saying great material here, mate. So thanks for joining us. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped to me. Okay, so we have a question about remixing MIDI songs to WAV after I've tweaked tracks. How come the WAV file doesn't include any channel changes I made or insert effects included in Mixdown? Okay, so about remixing MIDI songs to WAV after I've tweaked tracks. How come the WAV file doesn't include any of the channel changes I make or insert effects? Okay, so when you say remixing MIDI songs to WAV after I've tweaked tracks, the WAV file doesn't include. So if you are doing it from the export audio mixdown, so so if you're doing it as a stereo mixdown, it should include everything throughout the entire mixer path. But if you're doing multiple, like if you're doing okay, I want to take all of my instrument tracks and render these as audio files. When you click on multiple here, just make sure that you have, the group sends. You could have the inserts and channel strip. You could have it be dry. You could, add sends or group effects, as well as master effects, groups, and sends directly there. So if you're exporting a bunch, like if you're doing kind of a batch export, you could choose to have all of your effects included here just in the effects section. But if you're doing just a stereo mix down of all of your instruments, and you say, I just wanted to say remixing MIDI songs, so I'm assuming that they are set up as virtual instruments. If so, that anything that's in the mixer should automatically be included. Okay, so we have a question. Can you show the better way to sync video to score, scenes, etc.? Thanks. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll just do new project here. We'll import a video file. Okay. All right, so let's say if we have our video file here. So let's say we have our video, and I'll just open up my video window. All right, so one of the things that can be really helpful is using the warp grid mode. So if you go to warp, so let's say we were watching a video. So let's say, okay, I need to have kind of maybe a scene change. So let's say as we're playing it here, I'm just going to turn off my loop. So let's say right there, I want that to be 4 measures of time. So, first thing we do is go to your project setup, and it's always good to match the frame rate of the video. So when we have kind of like, so right at this point where that flag, I want measure 4 to be right at that point. So what we could do is when we have the warp grid, at this point, I could just take measure 4 and put it there. And as we do this, so I'll undo that particular move. And if we watch the tempo, I'm going to add a tempo track here. So once we have this set to warp grid, I could just say, okay, let's just make our tempo. And one of the modes that helps if we have, like, especially video often be on a separate display, is we could say under transport, we could say use video file as edit mode. So at this point, as we make changes, we could just see. So I want measure, 4 to be right there. So as we would just kind of make changes, we could see that as I move measures that, we could just kind of visually line up our different measures for, okay, I want this to, I want measure 11 to be right here where this changes. And once we get through the clouds, this is going to be measure, I need 4 even measures between those points. Then I could just warp the tempo to automatically match where the events are. So as we listen to it, we could have 4 even measures between those 2 events. So those are some like really helpful things for kind of getting started to get your video kind of lined up. Okay, so we just see question. Hi, Greg. Can you please explain the correlation between average load and CPU load? My Ryzen 5950X is around 20% load, while my average load in Cubase 10 is near max. Thanks in advance. So when the CPU, the performance meter, has changed slightly in version 10. So it may not correlate, because this is kind of showing your audio performance, which could be much different than your CPU performance. So if you're working with particular plugins, sometimes people will have an instrument plugin where we have multiple we have multiple instruments loaded on one instance of a plugin. Now, many plugins can't scale across multiple cores. So I kind of get this question a lot when people may have like one instrument with 8 different sounds loaded into it, or they have one track with 16 inserts, like really heavy inserts on that particular track. And it's like, oh, why is my CPU getting killed? Because often, depending on how the plugins work, most of the time you would need to kind of, if the plugin itself doesn't support multi-core, that if you have one instance of a plugin with multiple, very intense CPU intense patches, that's only going to be taking one CPU core. And you may have 12 other CPU cores that aren't really being used. So often, when we do this and it's showing kind of your performance meter, your audio performance meter, and not the CPU. So that's why the two are kind of different in how they can be, so, it shouldn't show the same because it's not a CPU meter inside of Cubase. It's kind of your audio performance meter. So different plugins may not scale, or your project may not be set up to scale to utilize all the multiple cores that's available in your Ryzen system. All right, so we see Kai Wen Franklin. Hey all, so are you all are still dependent on USB dongle since all apps are not dongle free? So it depends, if you're, so, currently we have Dorico, Cubase, and Nuendo that are not running on that have moved to the new licensing system. Others will be coming soon, so. All right, so we see Sable Winters from Bay Area in Northern California joining us. So thanks for being a part of the community today. Sorry we missed you on the Zoom meetup on Friday. All right, good to see Mark Rabin from Montana on. And we have Nick also on. All right, so we see, could you put the Cubase 12 on a memory stick? We are allowed up to 3 downloads, right? How does that work? So basically, you don't really put it on a memory stick, but you could have 3 different computers authorized and activated at once. So it's not on, Cubase 12 isn't on a memory stick, but basically you go to the Steinberg activation manager, and then you could have 3 different computers that are activated in your particular system. So it's not where the license isn't stored on a memory stick. So it's actually just going to be part of kind of like an identity-based system. So you would kind of log in with your My Steinberg credentials. All right, so we see from Mike Rivera says, as soon as I hit record on my MIDI complete controller, it jumps back. Thank you for your help. So see if you're, I'm not sure if you're using the complete controller as a controller itself, but if you just use the transport here, and another thing you do is if you hit Alt or Option plus K, there's a virtual keyboard, and you can see if you have the same behavior there. So it could be maybe a MIDI message is being sent if you're initiating record from the MIDI controller itself. So that could be causing it. All right, so we just see a question. Hi, Greg. Can you show how to use more than 8 focus quick controls in Cubase 12? All right, so let me just jump to different project here. so I'll just revert this. Okay, so let's say I have a, just really quickly, like I have my Hallian Sonic SE, and let's say on this track I have a retro log. Now, once we have like in the MIDI remote controls, you know, we could have, so let's say if I'm looking at my Choice controller here, it's a great MIDI controller I love. So let's say I have my controller here, and these are set up to do my quick controls. There is what we call our quick control focus. So we could say, okay, I want it to be track and plug-in window focus or track focus only. So let's say I have I'll just quickly add an audio track. And on this track, we'll put a bass amp. Okay, so when we go to, let's say, our quick controls here, so we could choose whether our, you know, we could choose our focus here. So I could say, I only want my quick controls to be on the track. All right, so let's say I open up my default quick controls here. So now as I adjust, I'm adjusting volume, pan, low cut on, my low cut frequency. So I could just come right over here and adjust my 8 quick controls. So if I want this to be only on the plugin, as soon as I click on the plugin, I can now control parameters for the plugin. So if I select a different track, I could control whatever kind of the plugin would be. So, but one of the things that you could do is, let's say I want it to be track and window control focused. So if I have the track focused, my quick controls are immediately doing this. We have 8 quick controls, and these could kind of be shared. And now if I click on the plugin, now the quick controls are doing the plugin. I click on the track, it's doing the track. Now, if we have multiple devices that are transmitting quick controls, we could also assign, a quick controls on my Nectar to do track, quick controls on my Choice Sauce to do effect or instrument. And then we could also just say, I want my quick controls to always do audio channel 9, and I could lock that. So if I go to another audio channel with quick controls, that my quick controls aren't controlling this, but only this track. So you could have multiple quick controllers that are assigned to tracks, just to plugins or whatever your active windows, or locked to particular tracks or plugins as well. So that way, if you have multiple knobs, you can configure them for different things if you wanted to. All right, so we have Mitch Michelle checking in from Michigan. Thanks for joining us. We have Luca, who's based in Munich. All right, so just see, how did Greg shift the whole start-stop as one instead of Control-Alt for each independently? So I think it's maybe Mark is talking about when we have like our left and right locators. So if you want to just move the locators, you'll see it kind of just turn into a hand when you come here, and then you could just move the locators around to different ranges. So let me know if that's what you were asking about, Mark. So you'll see you could turn into a compass for zooming that way, but you could also, if you want to click to turn it on, there's a preference to turn that on and off. But now you could also move it up just a little bit. You'll see it turn into a hand, and then you can move the left and right locators in two different parts. So let me know if that's what you mean, Mark. All right, so question, Greg, is there any way to export a mix down from an arranger chain without flattening it? So it has to be flattened first before it exports. I think the export is going to actually take into account kind of what the physical layout is of the project. So it has to be flattened first. All right, so we see just a question. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to create a track or a group track in which recorded audio is automatically transposed up or down? So most of the time it's, you know, so if I do this, let's say I have my drum loop here, and I'll just put my cycle on, you know, we could just come over here and transpose it directly there, but it's not on real-time input. But let's say if I wanted to, we might be able to do it with the pitch correct plugin. So let's say I want to add a group channel to this particular track. So let's make it a stereo group, and then I want to add a stereo audio track. Okay, so let's say this group, I'm going to put an insert on it. So basically what we're going to do is send the output of this drum loop into this group. On this group, let's go to our pitch shift plugin. So let's say pitch correct. So let's say we want to shift it down, and then I want that and let's see if we can set this input from the group. All right, so let's see. So we could process it through like a pitch shift plugin, but nothing that kind of does it. You'd have to kind of route it out through a group, but you could take any of the files, you know, afterward and just transpose it in real time there. So I'm not sure if you could do it afterwards or if you needed to apply the transposition while recording. But if you could let us know that. All right, so we have a question. Is there an option in the MIDI editor or MIDI modifiers for random panning of MIDI notes? All right, so I will just kind of come over here. Let's say I'll go to my Rhodes part here. All right, and let's say I'll just put in some quick so let's say we'll do this. So I think we could do it with the MIDI modifiers. So when we come to our MIDI modifiers, so we could choose to random. Let's see, we do. So we do position. All right, so let's go ahead and let's say we're listening to this. All right. So I'll just do this with a logical editor preset. So say I'll just join these all together. I think we could do it this way. Say insert type is equal to controller. Value 1 is controller 10. And we want to set value 2 to relative random values. All right, so let's say I just have panning in here. So let's say I'll just let's say between 20 and 100. So we could do stuff like that where we could just say, okay, I just want to take this and randomly apply panning. So you could so here when we look at this, we could just, if you have any existing data, you could just choose to randomize controller 10. So we could do stuff like that. So you can give that a try. But I think most of the MIDI modifiers are going to be for position, pan, but not random. Okay, reading through questions. Thanks for all the great questions. If you learned something new, make sure you actually do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And again, I'll be ending a little early as I have to get my son from school today. My wife's out of town. All right, so we have a question. Hello, I'm working on a project and I would like to involve my musician friends so that everyone can work on their part. What is the best way to do it and how should we share the project file? So I'm doing this with a couple of guys on the live stream, Gareth, Pablo, and Michael Teams. And, I think what we often do, and, we're all working remotely. Michael's in Dallas. I'm in DC. Gareth and Pablo are in Spain, but about 6 hours apart. And everyone just will send a project of what they have and as a standard WAV file, and then, add your part from there. So that's a pretty easy way to do it. And often I may get a tempo indication. One other thing that you could do if you want to be a little slicker about it is check out the VST Transit, and then you could actually upload. You could sign in with my Steinberg account. Let's see if I remember my password. And then with VST Transit, you could actually upload particular projects and share with other collaborators. So if you wanted to do that, definitely check out the VST Transit. And that's really designed where you could upload, particular files or a project, and people could work on it in a collaborative manner. So check that out. But, it's pretty easy for people also just to, take a WAV file, upload it, via WeTransfer if you don't have another file sharing service. So. Okay, and we also see just kind of a follow, some more information with the previous question, knowing that each time I save my file, an additional tray is created, which makes the file too big to share. Can you please provide me with an example of shared working file? So, yeah, so often, doing, sharing a project file, putting on like, Dropbox or WeTransfer or OneDrive or Google Drive. There's a number of different alternatives, but also, check out the VST Transit that we just showed. See Jay from Connecticut. So I'm going to have to build Greg Undo a statue in the middle of town square. Long overdue. All hail the mighty mind. So, well, thank you. I'm touched. All right. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped on me, so. Okay, so you see, question, is Cubase able to detect to tempo detect an audio clip and stretch it automatically to the existing timing, move the clip to an existing bar so it's aligned with the beat as well. Okay, so once we, all right, so I think I understand. Let me just. Find my file here, okay. Okay, so when we listen to this file here, the tempo, the click we're hearing isn't aligned with the audio in any way. So what I could do is select the particular event here. And let's go to project and we'll say tempo detection. So at this point, we'll say analyze. All right. And sometimes we may have to do like an offbeat correction, or it might be half time or double time. We could adjust that, or if you're in 3/4. So we've determined what the tempo is of the file. And we see that the tempo, like a real performance, is often going to be fluctuating in time. So what I could do now is, at this point, I could define where the downbeat of the file is. So it's probably right here. So I'm going to go into my bars and beats, and I'm just turn my snap on and say, okay, this is where our 4/4 is. So it's basically figured out where every beat is, and now it's going to be in 4/4 time. So as we So right now what we did is we aligned the beat to the particular audio file itself. So we didn't have to move the event to that. So, what we did is, we just basically told Cubase to, find the tempo. And then in just listening to it, we defined where the downbeat was. It's going to do it by, by bar. So we had some pickup notes here. So we have like the little drum fill. So we don't have to move it to the beat. Because, Cubase has figured out what the beats are. So let me know. So with Harry, so let me know if that works for you. Okay, so we have a question. Can you automate plugins while offline processing, like vocal delay throws, or automate them on the track itself? So, you can't necessarily automate like the plugin. You can't automate like the plugin itself changing. But if you wanted to come here, let's say we'll come to this project here. But if we wanted to just, put it on like specific parts of the project, so let's say while we're here, I just wanted to come. So let's say we're listening. All right, so let's say if I just wanted to throw like a delay on this, I could select just that particular region. And, so I don't have to do it for the whole event. So I'll just say, okay, now what I want to do is we're going to select, again, this region. Let's add a delay plugin. So at this point, I just wanted to add a quarter note delay. So as we listen to this, and now as this plays, gonna roll, and I'm gonna hit the road and gonna rock. So, and again, I could just kind of select that particular event and just come over here and say, okay, let's delete that. And let's say, like, while we're doing the guitar solo, I think we have a guitar solo somewhere here. So let's say while we're listening to the solo, so let's say, okay, starting right at this point in the solo, I want to run it through a flanger. So I'll just come. So while it's not changing the parameters within the flanger, we could kind of have it go on and off. So we could, have different effects all kind of going on simultaneously and say, okay, now I wanted to take, that and, run it through other things. So, in that sense, you could have it automated, like turned on and off in particular regions or particular moments in time, but it's not going to change the plugin parameter within that particular region. That would have to be automated with kind of traditional automations. So we see people apologizing because they're late. There's no tardy slips on our live stream, so we're just glad that you can make it. Okay, so I just see just probably a follow up from earlier question about quick controls. If I add a quick control for a MIDI file under MIDI modifier section, if I add control like attack, release, etc. If I open Cubase again, it's gone from the quick control panel. You know, so one of the things that you could do, you know, if you have, I'll just quickly add instrument track here. Okay, so once you have kind of the quick controls all set, you know, you could, you know, one of the things that you could do is just click right here and you have the options of saving presets. So, so maybe try saving a preset and do that. All right, so I see Kevin Mehmed is on and is just asking if I listened to the song you sent. So yeah, I listened to it, Kevin. That was really interesting. It was very creative use of your guitar processing on that. Okay, so I see just a question about the arranger chain. So it says just probably a follow up. Basically, what I want to do is select an arranger chain and export audio mixdown without having to flatten the arrangement beforehand. Is that possible? So how the arranger track works is it would need to be flattened before. So, but you could flatten it to a different arrangement if you wanted to. See, Sable Winters is telling people to hit the thumbs up and hit the like button. Okay, so we see question, is there a one-click solution for all chord pads to not have adaptive voicing on them? I would like to have it off by default. Yeah, I've kind of mentioned this as well. So sorry about that. Let me just get a preset loaded up here. Okay. All right, so let me just see if there's I'm trying to remember if there is a way. I think it might be one by one type of solution. me just... Okay, try this. So if we come just this little arrow here, you can see unlock all pads and lock all pads. And see if that helps. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions. All right, so we see that Mark Rabin's dog Stella is slowly healing, so that's good to hear. All right, we have Matt Elston checking in from London. Thanks for being a part of the live stream and such a loyal attendee. We see Randy Lee from Texas. All right, so we see a question from Samson Strike. Have some issues with my Icon Platform X, and it's 1B user-defined mode. All set up. Some channel motor faders sometimes force against fading. Is there a workaround to switch, I guess, switch off input, losing motor fading? So I'm not sure if it's when you go, if you're using it as a generic remote or if it is, so I'm not sure if maybe, if you could tell us, Samson Strike, if it's kind of configured as like a generic remote here, or if you're running it as a Mackie control. So you maybe, I know the icons are often kind of working as Mackie controls as well. So if you could let me know if it's, if you're running as Mackie control, but it kind of sounds like if it's fighting, maybe it's like, I know that some of the control surfaces, you can hit a button and it will transmit MIDI CCs. You hit another button, it's in like a Mackie control mode. So sometimes that could be conflicting internally. So if you could give some more information on that, that would be helpful. But it kind of sounds more like that it could be, more something with the actual Icon Platform X Plus. So we see, hi Greg, is there any way to use the shuttle jog through the MIDI remote yet? I'd like to retire a Mackie generic surface and use my Monogram console orbiter as a shuttle to scroll the locator by frames. So let me just set this up. So I think a lot of the controls, so let's say, I'll just come here and let's say I just want to nudge by frame here. Just look under transport. Okay, so let's say I just want this to nudge by 1 frame. And I'll set the next one to nudge minus 1 frame. All right, so now as I am in my project window here, I can nudge by 1 frame. Now, probably what's going on, you notice that I set up 2 different knobs, because probably, I'm not sure if the orbiter is transmitting, some knobs will transmit 1 MIDI CC value like when you turn to the right, and another MIDI CC value when you turn to the left. So if the knob is transmitting 2 separate MIDI messages, you could do that. And that's how, like, jog shuttle wheels will work is, as you go, one direction is transmitting 1 MIDI CC, you could have that nudge 1 frame to the right, and another one that would nudge 1 to the left. But most of the, MIDI knobs are only transmitting 1 single value. So it's not necessarily that the generic, the new MIDI remote isn't capable of doing it. It just, your controller is only transmitting 1 MIDI message. So if it transmits 2 MIDI messages, like my Nectar controller that I have in front of me is only going to transmit 1 MIDI message regardless of the direction. So it would, so there's no way to separate that. So that's probably why, like some controllers will be a little more sophisticated, and you could do jog shuttle with 1 knob because it's transmitting 2 different MIDI CC messages depending on the direction that you move it on. So we see from Jay from Connecticut, considering interface upgrade in Q3, Q4, does Steinberg AXR4T have a feature to link input levels for 2 or more inputs? So yes, you could do that. You could just you could define 2 inputs, or as like a stereo track, so that they'll be linked together. All right, so I think I got Mark Rabin's question about moving the left and right locators around. So glad I could figure it out for you. So you see Mark Rabin wants me to rap over that beat, so you probably don't. All right, so you see, hi, I have a very big problem with my Cubase system. Cubase crashes with everything I do, like adding inserts, adding tracks, loading in Melodyne, etc. Almost everything causes crashes. Any tips? So it says, I know it's not my PC because I used Studio One for a year and that never crashed. Yeah, I mean, if you could, there's not a lot of information to go on, but generally, as you can see from my system, adding tracks and inserts, and but make sure that, different things are up to date. And if you could let us know which version of Cubase, which platform you're on, which OS, that would be helpful. Yeah, and one other thing, and I see that other people are saying, maybe start with the fresh template, but you could also, try starting, start the program with holding down, if you're on Windows, Alt Control plus Shift, or if you're on Mac, Command Option plus Shift, and you could actually choose to disable the program preferences. So, And that should get you kind of a fresh slate of preferences. You could also bypass third-party plugins as well and see if you get isolated. You know, it could be maybe a particular plugin that's causing issues. All right, so I just see Jazz Dude mentioning an audio interface, which is the RUIO 16D. It's kind of a Dante and USB interface, and that's really kind of designed, and it's a Yamaha product, and it kind of looks like a UR22 with a Dante connector on it, and it's really kind of almost designed for a Dante system, like a live console system, to be able to integrate software plugins. So it probably wouldn't be my choice of a tracking interface, but if you're a live sound engineer and you're running things on a Dante network, you're like, wow, I really would love to have access to the frequency EQ plugin, then you could run, you know, VST3 plugins, and there's a suite of plugins that come with it as well. But if you're not doing live sound, it may make more sense for a more traditional audio interface. All right, so we have Brian Sawyer from Beulahville, North Carolina. Glad you can make it. All right, so we have a question. Hey, Greg, I know it's a crazy question, but I forgot how to do it. But how do I export an MP3 and a WAV file at the same time? Okay, so let's say I was going to export. We would go to the export audio mixdown, and then we could use the job cues. All right, so we'd say, okay, I want it to come here. Let's do my stereo mixdown, and we'll see export cue. So what I want to do is say, okay, we're going to export this as a WAV file, 24-bit 48K, add to queue. So now I choose, we're going to do an MP3 file at 48K, add to queue. Then click on Start Queue Export. It would then export the WAV file and then export the MP3 file. And so once you hit Start Queue Export, it's going to export both of those for you automatically together. So you could just hit it once and it'll generate 2 files for you. All right, so just see, I think it's directed to Kai. Just says, not sure if it's a driver. I have a Scarlett. I think this is with a person that was having a lot of issues. Not sure if it's I have a Scarlett 2i2 second generation. Would you recommend using the Steinberg low latency driver other than the Focusrite driver? So I definitely use probably the Focusrite driver. And if you're on PC, you know, one thing that you could check, it could be power management. So if you go to like your audio system, if you're on Windows, you may see like a activate. It's not on the Mac platform, so you don't see it on my screen. But here on the Windows platform, you'll see activate Steinberg power scheme. Make sure you're doing that because otherwise it could be where, you know, to save on battery life, your USB bandwidth is being throttled, and that could cause a lot of crashes like you're describing. So make sure that you're running on the Steinberg audio power scheme. All right, so we see Brian Sawyer just says he's having some program instabilities. So check to see if, a lot of times it could be like particular plugins. There was a 12.02 released, I think, just last week that's added some functionality and fixed a lot of other issues. So make sure that you're running the latest versions. And see if you're also, running, if you're running it with just stock plugins, if you get issues, or if it's maybe particular plugins that you're running into issues with. All right, so we have a question. In the MIDI editor, can you make the pitch bend volume automation move with the MIDI as you move MIDI notes? All right. So yeah, we could do that. All right, so I'll just do some 21st composite. Just do. All right, and I'll just add controller lanes here. So let's say we have pitch bend. And let's say volume. Okay, so as we move, let's say MIDI notes here, I think it's by default that will work. So I think if we go to so it's this little icon up here is auto select the controllers in the MIDI editor. So you just see this icon right up here. So without that checked, and I move notes, the MIDI CCs don't move with it. Sorry about that. And with this checked, I move the notes, and then we could have, as I select, now we could have the CCs kind of automatically move with the event. So as we select, that would select the controllers underneath. So make sure that that icon is turned on in your MIDI editor. And that way it will automatically select all of the icons or all of the particular notes. So if I just wanted to select those, and now when we select these particular notes, it's going to select all the controllers in that range of time, and that will move with it. All right, so we see, how does the future of Rewire look? I would love to fully use the Slaves plugins. So I think Rewire, it was developed by Propeller Heads, and they chose not to update it for future operating systems and future processors. So it's been discontinued, I think, for 2 years. So I think that we'll have a lot of programs that, that relied on Rewire. Sorry, hit the space bar, but a lot of programs that were relying on Rewire. It was just a decision for Rewire to stop doing any continuing or supporting it. So I don't think that the future for Rewire is good at this point. And I think a lot of people are using Rewire for Reason, and then Reason came out as a VST plugin, a VST3 plugin. So most people haven't really needed to actually use it, since that was kind of the writing on the wall. So but you could reach out to Propeller Heads and see if they have any more info. Okay. All right. So I see. I forgot how from John Costigan. I forgot how to replace the audio snare hits on a track with a new sample on the same track. All right. So there's a couple ways to do this. If it's going to be like a sample that was like copied a number of times, I'll show you this project here. Okay, so let's say I have like a kick that's being just that I wanted to replace, and it's one sample that's just kind of copied repeatedly. One of the things that you could do if you wanted to just replace that particular sample that's being utilized is to, so let's say I want to find bass drums or kicks. So if I hold down the shift key and drag over, I could, so I'm just dragging this into one sample over. It says you'll get, do you want to modify all events that refer to the same audio material? Say all. So now you could just kind of copy this over, and anytime that that sample was used, we could just come right over here and just replace. Just like so. So hold down the shift key and drag on top. And if that was being used multiple times. Now, if it was more of a traditional drum recording, like maybe we have something like this. And let's say, okay, I wanted to take my snare. So I could, if it was from like, you know, where it's going to be the same sound but recorded as one contiguous audio file, like multiple hits, here's where we could add, you know, even something like a sampler track. And like if I wanted to, let's just find, you know, or Groove Agent. So let's just say, okay, I'll add even the sampler track here. So find a snare hit. So I could drag this over, and okay, I want this to be our, all right, and I'll just find something. Okay, so I'll just replace that. So now what you could do, John, is come over here and just say, okay, I want to go to my snare track and go to hit points. And I'm just going to have my sampler track selected here. And I'll just say, okay, we're going to edit the hit points. On my snare track here. And then you could create MIDI notes from those and just drop it to the particular sample track. So you could create MIDI notes and then drop that into sampler track here. So let's say, okay, so I'll just say, okay, we're going to put this on to C3. So now as we come over here, so if I wanted to mute this snare, so now we're just triggering this sample. So that's something that's another approach, is just kind of finding hit points and making MIDI notes and routing out to like a MIDI, like a sampler or groove agent is very easy to work with. So you see, will Steinberg develop a AI instrument to make music from math models? I haven't heard of any plans. I mean, you could kind of think of the chord track as probably doing stuff like that, but it's maybe not an instrument per se. But you know, like Steinberg was like the first ones to do like, you know, virtual guitarist way back, you know, 20 some years ago, 25 years ago now or so. So we see Bygones just saying, I love this DAW so much. It's great. All right, so we see Rich Cole says, is it possible to take a photo of a guitar amp and pedal board settings and add it to a track's information? So yeah, you could do that. So when you come, let's say, to a particular track, you'll see this little like track icon. So you could double click here. And then, you know, often you get like, you know, various pictures here, but you could also put in user photos. So if you say, okay, I really want, you know, my amp settings, you can't really blow it up so much, but you could have it directly there. So a lot of people will, you know, associate their own, you know, particular picture with it, and then you could, you know, again, just double click and go to import, and then you could see all of your different files that could be accessed and utilized right there. So you can put user pictures in. All right, so we see question, does Cubase have a strummer feature? So there's a number of ways of doing like kind of very easy editing. So let's say if I want it to come, so let's say if I had a number of guitar parts, something like this, and we wanted to edit these. So one of the things that you could do is just grab the trim tool and hold down kind of the Alt or Option key, and then you could just kind of just strum, and you could kind of set the different rhythmic values if you want it to be more space between them. So you could just do that very easily. So hold down the Alt key with that tool, and then you could do kind of strumming stuff, simulate that pretty easily. All right. All right, so it says I'm a new user to Cubase 12, and when I use the vocal alignment tool, crashes a lot. I'm on a Mac Mini OS Catalina. Sorry if it's been addressed already. Also new here too. So I don't think Catalina. I don't think is officially supported. So I think that might be one of the issues. I've seen that with some of the alignment functionality. So I'm not sure if that is a supported OS with that. I know there's a lot of people running it, but some functions you may run into. All right. So we see from Jay, it says, question, I'm considering getting an MPE instrument for specific use as an expression editor. If you were going to apply MIDI expression in post for automation without note input, how would you? So a lot of times, people, like, one of the more popular controllers for this is the Rolly Seaboard. Where and you could basically set that up, as an MPE device. So when we go to your studio setup, you could just come over here and say that you're going to have a note expression input device. And here's where you can map kind of your, your X, your X, Y, and Z coordinates so that you could just simply move, vertically or horizontally on the key and have that tracked. So you could, have that be, so it says adding an MPE instrument for as an expression editor, but once you have, the MIDI data here, you could say, okay, I want to go to my note expression. And, once you're here, you could just choose there's two different modes where you could say, and by default now, when you double click on a note, I think it will automatically erase the note for you. But you could also, when this option is active, double click and go into the note expression editor. So if you wanted to have like independent volume control on the particular note, you could see that. Or if you wanted to do cutoff, so you could do all of the editing internally. So I don't think if it's for editing, most people would record it and then kind of tweak it afterwards because, maybe most people, it's not a conventional approach. If you're like, a strong keyboard player, like a piano keyboard player, but you could do that. But I wouldn't, probably buy a specific MP instrument. So I'm not sure if you're looking to, get an MPE controller to do that, or if you have an MPE instrument like in software, but you could just simply, have the note expression, just by double clicking on particular notes right there. And that's something that Steinberg kind of pioneered. It's now part of the MIDI specification for MIDI 2.0, which isn't widely supported yet. All right, so we see Michael Pierce has to take off, so it's going to go help a student. All right, we see Shane Hay on, so thanks for joining us, Shane. All right, and Kerwin Young is on. Thanks for joining us. All right, my chat field jumped to me. I'm trying to find my spot. All right, so it's the question. Hello, I downloaded a trial version of Cubase. Would like to know if this software can help me with ideas to arrange my compositions with better quality, something similar to Band in a Box. So Cubase is going to be allowing you to, record MIDI data, record audio, mix it, edit it, but it's not kind of automatically, where you type in a chord progression and it generates, a salsa, generates like a New Orleans jazz, a pop track, a country song. It doesn't have that, but, you can have chord tracks where we could just come over, where we could have your different chord progressions and we could have your audio, follow and have your MIDI follow the chords. So if you wanted to just kind of listen and we could have this laid out, but it's not going to generate different parts, kind of like, which is, I haven't used Band in a Box in 30-ish years. But I think that's what kind of what Band in a Box does is you do this and say, give me a country song, give me a smooth jazz song. So Cubase doesn't do that, but it will allow you to take your ideas and sculpt them so that they're your own. And so you don't have kind of the same kind of, auto-generated music as other programs can create for you. All right, so we see Robbie Bowling from Dallas. Thanks for joining us. Loyal attendee. All right, and we have Graham Witcher from Royal Wootton Bassett in the UK. Great to see you on. Okay, so we see a question. Is there a way to clip gain, pre-gain multiple channels all at once? Select all and control the pre-gain. So let's give it a shot. There's probably even a different approach. So, one way of doing kind of pre-clip gain is, if we have everything selected here, you could just go directly to the clip gain right there. All right, then let's see if we could do it in the mix console as well. So say if I come over to, I'll activate the pre section in my racks. All right, so I'm going to select number of tracks here. And I'm going to turn on Q-Link. And then, so all you have to do is enable Q-Link. And then all the selected tracks, you could adjust the gain all at once, like so. Okay. Yeah, and also just to get Q-Link, you hold down Alt or Option plus Shift. All right, so we have a question. How do you copy all events on a track line in the project window? Example, piano track, 12 separate MIDI. Same track, move all, keeping position in moving in the timeline bars. Okay, let's just see if I just, okay. Okay, so I think, I don't know if this is maybe like a, okay, let's see if I can. All right, so one of the things that you could do if you wanted to copy events. All right, so let's say if I copy this particular event, sometimes we may, so, you know, if I wanted to keep it, I think it might be like a constrained direction type of question. But let's say, okay, I'm copying this event here. I want it to be in the same exact time position. So I'm going to hold down Alt, and then I'm going to move it first up. And let's say I accidentally moved it in time. So now if I hold down Alt or Option to make the copy, if I hold down, before releasing Alt or Option, I hold down the Command or Control key. Now because I moved it vertically in time, as soon as I hold down the Control or Command, I can't move this. It's locked. It'll constrain the direction of the particular edit. So so just holding down the Alt key will make a copy, and I could place that freely anywhere. But if I moved it vertically first, when I hit and hold down Control, it's going to lock it into its vertical position. Now, if I moved an event, let's say horizontally first, and I want to keep it on the same track, so I want to lock it horizontally. So it really depends on the first direction that you move. So now if I hold down Control, I can't move it horizontally. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to do, Shane. But, you know, so try holding down Alt or Option and then move it one direction. And then you can constrain the direction of the movement based upon the first direction that you moved it by holding down Control or Command key. Okay, reading through. All right, so you just see question. Hey, Greg, why Cubase make a limit with 8 focus, control, MIDI, remote assign parameter, and plugin quick control? We have more than 8 parameters. So how do we assign after 8 in the plugin quick control section? So, you know, anything, it doesn't have to be quick controls. You know, you could have multiple parameters. Let's say if I come to an instrument, you know, so quick controls, you know, because, you know, 99% of controllers have 8 knobs on it. So that's why there's 8. But if we have a particular parameter, you know, one of the things that you could do is, I'll just load up a quick preset here. All right. So, you know, if we wanted to assign it to, you know, so if you're not worried if it's a quick control or not, but if you want it to be assigned to a particular control, what you could do is, again, just kind of right click. And a lot of times you could, you know, just learn CC directly there, or you could just kind of pick up different parameters as well. So if we're in kind of like our mapping assignment, so let's say I adjust this knob. All right. And now, a lot of different parameters you could right click and just do a learn CC directly from here. Now, so that's available on a lot of particular plugins, and sometimes you could just right click and pick up different parameters for controller mapping, depending on the plugin itself. So I don't have, so you could just simply come here. So it's not limited to 8 controls. There's 8 quick controls, but you could have any number of parameters that will be assigned to this particular parameter right there using this system. So, as soon as we come right here, let's say, okay, so we see the Alpha 1 shape that is being captured in the Cubase function. I could assign that to any knob. So if I wanted to come here, I wanted to release. Okay, now I could just say apply mapping, and this knob is just automatically going to control the release. So anything that you kind of select in your plugins, you could map to particular control. So if you have, 400 knobs, you can map each of those to particular tracks that way. See Mark Rabin saying thanks for everyone's for their help. So I think it's a wonderful community, and thanks for being such a great attendee and community participant, Mark. So. All right, so we have Spike Williams checking in late from Wales, so we're glad you can make it. Okay, so we see, is there a simple way of inserting stereo plugins and having stereo output on a mono track? So what a lot of people do without creating like a group, so let's say I want a stereo plugin on my snare. I could just right click in my particular file here. So you could just right click. Let's add an effects channel to the selected track, and let's make it a stereo reverb. And now that reverb is automatically routed to that particular track. So it's really, the same amount of clicks as routing to loading up a insert effect versus a send effect that's being sent there. So. See John Koskin saying, that's the exact project. I'd hope you show me 2 ways to replace snare. Mind reading your specialty? I try to figure out questions as best I can. So, but my wife has accused me of reading her mind a couple times. So, all right. So we have Tiago checking in from Brazil. Thanks for joining. So we see Marco just saying, I know the answer to that one is probably with our, the icon. It says, do not install as Mackie, just use the MIDI remote pages there. It's very important for the buttons are configured UCC, not toggles. Thanks for sharing your insight. All right, we see Toadlick just saying, hard to keep my chin off the floor during these live streams. So many excellent tips and tricks catch me by surprise. Thank you. Yes, you're welcome. Thanks for being a part of the live stream as well. So we see Graham Witcher saying the new MIDI remote mapping function has revolutionized Cubase. So it's very helpful for a lot of things. All right, so we have a question. When using tempo detection in floating tempo music, rubato, sometimes Cubase adds more bars than it should. How to delete or add bars and recalculate the subsequent tempos in tempo detection mode. All right, so let's jump back. All right, so as we do a tempo detection, we notice that it will, so as we do, so we get our project menu, tempo detection. All right, so this automatically puts you in kind of the mode where basically what it's doing is it's automatically puts you into the warp grid mode. So if we okay, let's come right over here to our warp grid mode. And now as we come over here, so let's say, maybe we notice that it missed a downbeat here. So at this point we could just say, okay, what I want to do is adjust this, and we notice that as we make an adjustment here that it's gonna automatically, once we have this turned on, this will go through the subsequent changes after let's say we make a change here, and then it does the analysis of the tempo after that fact. So it kind of puts you directly into the mode to make little tweaks and adjustments using the tempo warping tool, so that you could make, so you could listen to it, and, and even when we close this, you'll get, often you'll get a message saying, okay, are you sure you want to exit the warping mode? So a lot of times, puts you directly into that mode where you can make tweaks. And again, that's just using kind of the tempo, and you want it to put it into warp grid. And what you do is you just kind of move, the measures here based upon the actual positions, like so, and then those will be recalculated afterwards. All right, so we see Winston De Jesus or De Jesus official says, I'm a new Cubase 12 user. Welcome, and thanks for getting Cubase. I switched from Logic to Cubase. This DAW is incredible. Well, welcome to the live stream, and we hope to see you on many more, and we're glad you're enjoying your Cubase. Okay, so we just see a question. What's new in creating instrument/MIDI device panels? So that part of the program hasn't been updated in a while, so there's nothing really new there. And then question, is there an auto map function for external hardware? So, generally, that's kind of the convenience of using VST plugins over hardware, but so I'm not sure what you want to do with the auto map, but it's not going to automatically kind of create, an editor for your, to control like the internal engine of your instrument. But if you have external hardware for MIDI remote, once you have this set up, so now with 12 we could do MIDI remotes. So if we wanted to, let's say on my controller I have a number of pads, I could come right over here and just say, okay, I want it to have buttons, and I wanted to configure these buttons so that now as I hit these from my external hardware, that I could just configure these buttons here to automatically populate to drive controls of different aspects of the program. So that is kind of an auto mapping the MIDI messages that your MIDI controller is transmitting to then define different functions directly inside of Cubase to, control instruments, control program functions. So you could do that with external hardware, but it's not really anything that's been added to control like, the synthesis of an external, instrument. All right, so we see a question. Hello, is there a function to set noise reduction automatically during recording of audio? So generally, most people wouldn't want to do like a noise reduction during recording. They would want to do it afterwards. Cubase doesn't necessarily have any noise reduction capabilities are built in. There's a number of tools. Wavelab does as an audio editor and mastering solution, but Cubase doesn't have. But while you're tracking, if you do have a bit of noise, you could do stuff like utilizing, like a noise gate, which doesn't take it out of the file. But if it's an isolated bit of noise during your recording, you could take those out. So. So we see, hey, Greg, there are a lot of avid users that are jumping ship because of the new switch that they are doing to their software going subscription. Please tell me that Steinberg won't do the same. So Steinberg will always, what they've announced so far is they always intend to do a perpetual license. So there may be different subscription models that we have for some educational facilities that require a yearly subscription for their IT infrastructure and for payment. But we will all, as far as I've been told, they always plan to have a perpetual license available so that you're not forced into a subscription model. Yeah. Seems like a bummer. I don't like to rent my bases, so. So Kaiwan Franklin just wishes he could create an XM radio station to play our music on. So. So we just see a question. Are patch scripts still a thing for external hardware? So you can still do them. So if you come over here to your MIDI device manager, you could just install a device. So if you say, okay, I have an old Korg 01W, and then you could open the device. You could choose your patch banks. And you can still kind of have access to all of them. So I won't actually create a patch bank, but so now if you wanted to, come over here and say, okay, we wanted to, let me just connect it to a fictitious output port here. And then you could see kind of all of your programs. So obviously, that's still all available here, and you could create these as well. So if you have external instruments, you could still access all the patches as well. All right, Jazz Dude wants people to smash the like button. All right. We see, does Cubase have a record label for demo tracks? So we don't. I think Yamaha actually has a record label. I think they've done some like Nathan East CDs, a Bob James CD. But but it's probably not our area of expertise, just like I wouldn't want my record label to make a DAW program. So, but I think there's lots of options available. It's just not Steinberg's area of focus. All right, so I think we got Shane Hayes' question answered. So, yeah, it could be a tricky one to ask in 200 characters. So, okay, so we have a question. Cubase 12 user here. Would you take us through groove agent styles and patterns using one drum kit like the acoustic kit? Okay, so just start a new project here. Okay, so I'll just start off with like an acoustic agent. Okay, so once we have an acoustic agent kit, you know, some of the beauty of it is, you know, we could trigger different patterns. Let's say we're playing along here. We have this automatically synchronized to the transport. So if I want like a good sounding, you know, if I hit play in a transport, my drums will play automatically. Turn off the click track here. So, you know, we'll have like with the built-in, we'll have like 2 different intros. Whatever tempo I have, it's going to automatically follow. We'll have different endings. And we could have different fills as well. And these could all be just triggered from different MIDI notes. And then we have these pattern pads. So when we have pattern pads, once we're here, we could have some different control. Because obviously, you know, one of the things that sounds like fake programmed turn on automatic drums is when they play the same exact thing over and over and over and over again. So here we could actually have different levels of dynamics. So if you want very soft, and you can hear like the range of different drum samples. So when we go vertically, that's going to be our dynamics, and we have complexity going horizontally. So we have 16 levels of complexity for each of these 8 patterns. I could also have a halftime feel for each of those. And these could all be turned on by different MIDI messages. We could also say auto complexity. So we say every bar go 1 or 2 levels more or less complex. So it's not playing the same exact pattern all the time. And then we could say every 4 bars do a drum fill. So now we'll have drum fill coming up. And then if we wanted to add more swing, now if we open up this little envelope here, we could also go through different styles. So if I say, okay, let's come over here. I want more of a blues style. So some of these are designed for specific kits. Okay, so let's say, okay, now I want it like Chicago blues. So we could choose different instruments, different styles. So let's say, okay, ballad. And then each of these styles will have its own 4 fills. Once we load this up, and then we could have, again, our different variations. So that's a quick run through, like, working with the different styles as well as just finding different styles. So say we want like a funky thing or fusion. So you could just kind of try these different ideas out. And the thing I love about it is you just kind of can play it, and it's often more inspiring to record to than a metronome. And you could kind of start off with a particular pattern, and at that point, go back. You start with something very simple, and then you could add the fills and different variations in afterwards very easily. Okay, so we see from Mark, hi, own a Nectar P4. In previous Cubase versions, I had a script that mapped it to various functionality automatically. Did we lose this feature with the new MIDI remote feature in Cubase 12? So that should still be there. You may have to re-enable it, but you have the capabilities in Cubase 12 to do like your own remote. But the existing remote configurations that you have, those should be working the same way, but you may have to go into like the script, so if you get to your studio setup here, and we'll just kind of just reading a quick COVID message from my son's school here, came in. So when you come here, you may have to just, if you click on this, you may have like a script for your Nectar controller. I don't have the Nectar script on mine, but all of the settings may be just set right there, but there's nothing that Steinberg did that would take that away from you in updating to version 12. All right. Reading through questions here. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, my chat field jumped on me, so try to find my spot. Okay, I think I'm in the neighborhood. See, Graham Witcher just mentioning the awesome Power Groove agent. It's mind-boggling. It's a whole galaxy of the Cubase universe. All right. Okay, so we see from Marco Crop says, I have Cubase 12 trial, although I'm still in learning curve. I already have almost created my dream workflow, still trying to make the motorized faders work as I want. Discovered pages, so that's great. Welcome to, we're glad that you're checking out the Cubase 12 trial. Thanks for being on the live stream today. So we see from Kai Wen Franklin that they need to have Groove Agent with updated style. So, you know, you could also check out there's, you know, probably, you know, 20 to 30 different expansion kits with different patterns for Groove Agent that are available as well. So check that out. All right, so we see Marco just saying, but one problem, some buttons I have to toggle twice to activate / deactivate the button light. So I'm not sure which, yeah, you know, so some, if you're doing this with the remote control, you know, so let's say, Marco, if you're there, so let's say let's say if we're in the mapping editor, you know, one of the things that you could do is let me just get to a different controller here real quick. Hang on. So let's say if we're here, okay, so I'm just going to hit, sorry, just dropped my phone. Okay, so let's say if I'm, I think they may have moved one thing that was, but there is a way that you could have it where it's going to be like a toggle on and off. It may have moved into 1202. I think in the initial release it was in here, but then you could kind of set up whether it's, you know, a one time or like momentary, or if it's latched. Just see if it's, yeah, I think it had moved, but there is a way of mapping it where it's toggle or held, or, you know, will stick until it's hit again. You see Michael Teams looking for some more progressive rock styles with odd time signatures. So check out the Marco Miniman library for Groove Agent as well. There's lots of different meters, and it's very prog rock. And you could always get like Simon Phillips stuff as well. Okay, so I just see a question. Can I use two different interfaces, one for ticking and one for playback? So I guess one for maybe tracking and one for playback. So you can't use, generally, most interfaces, you can't use two of them at the same time because they're not going to externally clock and synchronize together. But you could track with one interface and then say, okay, I want to play back with this interface. You could do that, but generally not simultaneously. Some interfaces will allow you to do that, like, you know, PCI based, some Thunderbolt based, some Firewire based interfaces, but generally you can't stack multiple USB interfaces together. Okay, so you just see Marco is just saying the Cubase functions work great with the toggling, but the physical MIDI controller icon platform M plus is still maybe lighting up. So it could be maybe a function with that particular controller. All right, so I know we had a couple questions that were sent in. We go to those. I think we answered one of them already. Just toggle back. Once again, if you learned something new, make sure you do hit the like button. Okay, so we had a question, how to monitor effects like reverb while recording, but not record them. When I'm tracking, I can't hear the effects as I'm recording. Okay, so this is actually from a celebrity producer, but we'll go ahead and show this. So when we want to record audio, so let's say we add a particular audio track. Okay, at this point, let's say we have this track going out to a send effect. Okay, so we open up this particular track, we look at send. So at this point, the audio is going to be routed directly to our send effect. And we'll hear it. Now, when you don't hear the send effect, the reason why is probably because the audio interface is set up for direct monitoring. Okay, and why audio interfaces have a direct monitoring mode is to minimize latency latencycycycy. Sometimes, especially in the old days, as we would work with audio interfaces and you wanted to have a reverb effect may have a lot of latency in the reverb, especially older plugins, and the computers weren't as fast. So to minimize the latency so it doesn't feel like someone is in like a really badly dubbed foreign film, what companies would do is employ direct monitoring. And what direct monitoring allows you to do is to pass the input signal directly from the input to the output so that the person can monitor with minimal latency. But the problem is when we go directly from the input, basically almost like a hardwire input to the output, what it does is it bypasses the internal mix engine of Cubase. So any effects that you have, in this example, the revelation, the reverb, you wouldn't hear. So if you have this set up and direct monitoring is enabled, you're not going to hear your real-time effects. So if you're tracking with let's say we're doing a guitar part, and we run into this with guitar as well. So say we add a guitar part and we go to an insert, and now I wanted to run the VST amp rack. So as we do the VST amp rack, we're doing this and people go, okay, I don't hear this when I play, but when I stop and play it back, then it gets processed through either the reverb or through the distortion. So if you don't hear the effects while you're tracking, make sure that you go to your studio menu to studio setup and go to select your audio interface and make sure that direct monitoring is turned off. Now, some of the effects that you're tracking with may have latency, and sometimes this could throw people off. So that's why there's the direct monitoring options, but a lot of times people want to, track and record through a reverb or monitor through a reverb. Now, if you have a Steinberg interface, like a UR series, one of the great things is we can now come over here. Let's activate direct monitoring. And if we go to, let's say I'm just going to switch my connections here. So I'll go to my outputs, and let's say we're going to have this set. Okay. And now as we go to add an audio track, we'll choose our input and we hit add track. And then as we want to do this, let's come to our audio connections. Just going to bypass the control room here momentarily. All right, and we'll just set, let's say, our input here, and we'll say mono in 1. So let's say for this particular track, we'll say, okay, our input is mono in 1. And then you could actually have kind of your own, once we do this, like the UR interfaces, you could have your own DSP. So you could monitor with DSP in real time. But other interfaces usually don't have that. So we could just, again, come right over here, make sure that you have. So if you want to hear the effects while you're recording and you think that you have everything set up, just make sure that you have direct monitoring turned off. All right, so let me just go ahead and set this quickly back. All right, so we had a couple questions. So it says, if I accidentally launch Cubase with the audio interface turned off, Cubase switches to the internal audio outputs. All the channels are there, only 2 are connected. If I close Cubase and relaunch it with the audio interface turned on, all the channels register as not connected. If I select a saved preset, they are connected to the correct interface, but the device ports are all over the place. I have to manually reconnect them and then resave the preset. What's the point of the preset if it doesn't retain its settings? So I think what's happening a lot of times, one is, if you want to, it's always good to have your audio interface on before, because Cubase will try to, and if you tell it to, depending on your operating system, it may pop up saying, what audio interface do you want to use? And that could be another indication that, okay, turn on your audio interface and then Cubase will see it. And then you could do that, because you may be going from like a 24 in, 24 out configuration to a stereo in, stereo out configuration. And Cubase knows what you had at the last point and may be trying to recreate that. Sometimes with operating systems, like on Mac OS, if you have a HDMI monitor connected, that can often mess up your, the Apple Mac OS will often try to, always, try to route the audio to the HDMI output once it sees it's connected. And that messes up a lot of configurations this way. So it could also be, dealing with that as well. So if you're on Mac OS, okay. So just see the order of the inputs gets scrambled after a short while, and this is with audio connections in the control room. The only way I found to sort them out is to wipe all the settings, manually reprogram them in the right order. Is there any way of moving the channels around by dragging them? So, once we have all of your inputs defined here, let's say in our, it looks like we're here, they're not going to, once they're kind of configured here, there isn't a way to kind of just drag and drop it. But it could be related to like a similar input output scenario that you're running, and also if you could let me know what audio interface is being used, and if it is doing that, whether it's always using that interface or if you're losing it after booting into a different audio driver with different configurations. All right. So we see another question. So projects can no longer be opened by double clicking from the hub. I regard this as a bug. All right, so let me take a look. I think we could do that. So let's come over here. Let's say new project. So if I wanted to open up a particular project, so let's say I wanted to go to, we haven't opened this one up, so I could double click directly from the hub and open there. So we'll see if the project opens. But it looks like that worked as expected. So that seems to work for me. But let me know if yours works a bit differently. All right, I think that was the mailed in questions. We jump back to our live chat. All right, so we just see after pitch tuning a vocal track, how can I export the track in mono? Actually, every time I export it, it exports it as track names, poly left and right. All right, so let's say we've done pitch correction here. All right, so do vary audio. Okay, so I will just go ahead and do some here. So let me just activate the vary audio. So let's do. Okay, so now if I wanted to just take this, so if I wanted to export it, one of the things you could do is just come directly to our render in place under the edit, and let's do our render settings. And at this point, I could just choose to do dry. We could give it a specific name. Tell it to go to a specific path here. And let's just go ahead and render it. And we can see that the rendered file is mono. If you are doing it from the export audio mixdown window, and you're just choosing like the vocal file here, so let's say, okay, so I just want to do the vocal file. Make sure that you have, if it's a mono track, if you have this set to include the sends or groups or the master outputs, if it's going through any stereo group or stereo effect send or through a stereo output, that will automatically be configured. But if you have it set to disabled or inserts and strip, that would maintain it in mono. So two different ways of doing that. So, but if you're telling it to go through the stereo, to employ the stereo effects and the stereo groups, if it's being routed to one, it would create a stereo file to include the stereo effects. We see, so Kai Wynn Franklin's, but are the folks at Steinberg keeping their ear on the pulse of today's music creatives? So, there's lots of people who do research on that. And obviously, many of the hit records that we hear now are being done in Cubase. Most of the films and TV shows that you hear are being done in Cubase. So a lot of people don't seem to have a problem with it doing hip hop tracks and, lots of K-pop stuff. So there's lots of stuff going on in Cubase. All right. So we see question. Does Steinberg does some research on running VST/Is, VSTIs plugins on GPU? I don't know. I'm usually not involved in kind of the research part of it. I know that there's, like a plugin company that's, says that they're going to be doing stuff on GPU or kind of based on GPU. But, I think, we'll have to see how it goes. I think what I've been told, and I'm sure there's probably ways of overcoming this, is that there could be a lot of, there's obviously a lot of variables between different companies and GPUs, as well as, there's a lot of variables, but also supposedly a lot of latency. So we'll see how it goes with that. All right. So just see from Kevin, just seeing when we could Zoom. So maybe if you want to reach out Thursday, maybe that might be an okay time, Kevin. So. I see Michael Pierce has made it back. That's great. Okay. Okay. So we see a question from Martin from Denmark. Okay. So he's got a few questions. I was wondering if it's possible to pan certain notes in the piano roll using the sampler track. Okay, so let me just... create an empty project. Okay, so I will create a sampler track. All right, so let's come over here and let's see if it'll respond to the note expression data. So let's say, okay, let's do pan. All right, so now as we're doing this, Okay, so as we now listen to it, we should hear probably the panning. So yeah, so if you have the note expression editor, you can just double click, and that's kind of using the sampler track to be able to just do that. Okay, so you see other people double clicking on the hub working fine. All right, so we have Daniel checking in, saying hi from Munich, Germany. Welcome to the live stream. All right, we see Gareth on, so great to see Gareth. Hope the bass lines were okay. Okay, so we see, hey, Greg, I have a question. I have a Triton keyboard racks, and I'm trying to have all the presets show up in Cubase. Where can I select them if that's possible? Okay, so again, that would be, I'm not sure if there's a Triton rack script. There may be one available on the Korg website. But if you go to your studio, to more options, to MIDI device manager, you can click on install device. And here's a Triton. You tell it what MIDI port it's connected to. And then you could open a device. You'll see like your patch banks. So you can do that. So let's say now I add a MIDI track. Okay, I want this to go out to my Korg Triton. All right, and I'll just connect it here. Let me just... But you come over here, then you could see kind of all your different presets right there. So give that a shot. All right, so thanks for the kind words on the bass lines, Gareth. Glad they worked out. Should have some more to you this week. Yeah, it's just see Gareth. Yeah, so send me another bass. Yeah, send me another project. I'd be happy to take a stab at it. So my wife is out of town this week, so it's kind of busy, but I should have time over the weekend to get the other ones done. Okay, so we have a question. Can you show the track file browser to upload a picture to a new particular track? So once you see, like, if you open up track kind of large, you'll see this little icon here. Double click, and then click on user, and then you could just click on import and look for picture files there. All right, you see Sable Winters saying thank you. She's learning so much today. Gareth says, love the motorized bass for Star Caravan. That was a hard one to figure out. I was trying to be all clever with the Star Caravan bass line, but I was out clevering myself, so took a lot of different approaches on that. All right. Yeah, so I see from Gareth, I don't have the song Tuxedo. So yeah, please go ahead, send it. All right, so I think I'm at the end of the questions. I know I had to leave a little early today to get my son from school, but we'll see if there's any other questions that kind of pop up. If not, we could wrap up just a couple minutes earlier than I thought. We'll give it another minute or so. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. And we'll again be doing this on Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Okay, I'll wait another 30 seconds. Sometimes it takes a little while. There's usually about a 30-second delay from when I talk to. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And again, we'll be doing kind of our typical 4-hour on Friday. I want to thank everyone for being part of the live stream, and look forward to seeing everyone on Friday. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll be back in a couple days. So thank you very much.